Put your hand down. This isn't remedial math. Mr. Hollander capped the marker and stepped aside from the whiteboard. Let's give someone who actually belongs in this class a shot. Laughter stirred behind Chanel Tyson, but she stood and walked to the board without a word. She uncapped the marker and solved the equation. 5 precise steps, no hesitation. Mr. Hollander's jaw clenched. His smile vanished. You must have seen that online, he snapped. That doesn't mean you understood it. Chanel stepped back, the marker still in her hand. He stared at the solution, the one he couldn't deny, and felt control slipping from his grip. He had tried to put her in her place, only to expose his own. And now every student in that room saw exactly who was out of their depth. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. Chanel sat in her usual spot, near the back of Mr. Hollander's AP Calculus class, her pencil moving steadily across her notebook as she worked through the complex equation. The familiar smell of dry erase markers filled the air, while Mr. Hollander's squeaking marker moved across the whiteboard, his tall frame casting a shadow over his work. The classroom was quiet except for the soft scratching of pencils and occasional whispers. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust particles floating in the air. Chanel double-checked her work, confidence growing with each step of the solution. Mr. Hollander turned to face the class, his thin lips curved into what seemed like a perpetual smirk. Now then, he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, who would like to solve this one for us? His eyes swept past Chanel, as if she were invisible. Chanel's hand shot up immediately, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. Mr. Hollander's eyebrows rose slightly, and a short, dismissive laugh escaped his lips. "Anyone else?" he asked, his gaze moving to the other side of the room where Ashley Trent and her friends usually sat. "Let's give someone a real shot at this." The silence in the room grew heavier. Chanel kept her hand raised, straight and steady. She could feel her classmates' eyes on her, some curious, others uncomfortable. "Mr. Hollander," Chanel said, her voice clear and controlled, "I know the solution." His smile tightened. "Well," he drawled, "since you're so eager, Miss Tyson." He held out the marker like it was a dare. "Show us what you've got." Chanel stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. She walked to the front of the class, her footsteps echoing in the silent room. Taking the marker from Mr. Hollander's hand, she faced the board. With steady strokes, she began writing out the solution. Her hand moved confidently across the white surface, each step flowing naturally into the next. She could feel Mr. Hollander's presence behind her, could practically sense his scrutiny intensifying with each correct step she took. When she finished, she capped the marker and turned around. The solution was perfect. Every step clearly shown, the final answer circled neatly at the bottom. The class remained silent, but now there was a different quality to it, a mixture of surprise and admiration. Mr. Hollander's face had transformed. His usual smug expression had hardened into something cold and tight, like a mask about to crack. His jaw clenched visibly as he glanced at her work. "You may sit down," he said curtly, not acknowledging her solution. He quickly erased her work and moved on to the next problem as if nothing had happened. As Chanel walked back to her seat, she caught snippets of whispered conversations. "Did you see his face? She didn't make a single mistake. I can't believe she actually did it." The rest of the class passed in a blur. When the bell rang, Chanel gathered her books, ready to head to her next class. But Mr. Hollander's voice cut through the shuffling of departing students. "Miss Tyson, a moment." She approached his desk, where he was writing on a pink slip of paper. Without looking up, he held it out to her. "For disrupting class?" Chanel stared at the detention slip in disbelief. "Disrupting class? But I just answered the question you asked." Your attitude was confrontational and inappropriate, he replied smoothly, finally looking up at her. His eyes were cold behind his glasses. You'll serve detention after school today. But that's all, Miss Tyson. His tone left no room for argument. The rest of the school day passed in a haze of anger and confusion. During detention, Chanel sat in the empty classroom, her mind replaying the morning's events over and over. When she finally got home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the kitchen windows. Her mother was already home from her early shift at the hospital, stirring a pot of pasta sauce on the stove. The familiar smell of garlic and herbs filled the kitchen, but even the comfort of home couldn't ease the knot in Chanel's stomach. You're late, Wanda said, turning to face her daughter. Her expression shifted as she noticed Chanel's face. What happened? Chanel dropped her backpack on a kitchen chair and sank into another. Mr. Hollander gave me detention today. Detention? You? Wanda wiped her hands on a dish towel and sat down across from her daughter. What for? For solving a calculus problem correctly, Chanel said, her voice tight with frustration. She explained what had happened in class, the equation, Mr. Hollander's dismissive laugh, her perfect solution, and his reaction. Wanda's fork, loaded with pasta she'd been about to taste, stopped halfway to her mouth. He gave you detention for being right? Morning sunlight slanted through the detention room's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the empty desks. Chanel sat alone, her calculus textbook open before her, pencil moving steadily across her notebook. The quiet scratch of lead on paper mixed with the soft swishing sounds of Mr. Rhodes's broom in the hallway outside. From beyond the detention room door came the sharp staccato of heels on linoleum and Ashley Trent's distinctive laugh. Oh my God, you should have seen his face when I told him I didn't study. More giggles echoed through the hall. Chanel's pencil paused mid-equation as Ashley's voice carried through the thin walls. Mr. Hollander totally loves me. He's like so easy to work with. Mr. Rhodes's methodical sweeping brought him closer to the detention room door. His weathered face appeared briefly in the window, eyes meeting Chanel's for a moment before he moved on. The bell rang, forcing Chanel to pack up her things and head to AP Calculus. Her stomach tightened as she entered Mr. Hollander's classroom. He stood at his desk, a stack of graded tests in his hands, that familiar smirk playing at his lips. Pop quiz results, Mr. Hollander announced, pacing between the rows. Most of you performed adequately. His gaze lingered on Chanel for a moment before he turned to Ashley. Miss Trent, would you like to review problem 3 for the class? Ashley twirled a strand of blonde hair around her finger, her designer bracelet catching the fluorescent light. Okay. She squinted at the problem. So, you take the derivative first? Not quite, Mr. Hollander said, his tone gentler than anything Chanel had ever heard from him. Try again. Oh, you do that chain rule thing? Ashley's voice lifted at the end, making it sound like a question. Almost, Mr. Hollander encouraged. Anyone else want to help Miss Trent? Several hands shot up, but Chanel kept hers firmly in her lap. She watched as Ashley fumbled through 3 more wrong answers, each met with Mr. Hollander's patient guidance, rather than the sharp criticism he usually deployed. As the class ended and students began filing out, Chanel deliberately took her time packing up. She bent down to tie her shoe, staying out of sight behind a desk. Mr. Hollander's voice dropped to a whisper. Ashley, about your test performance. I know, I'm sorry. Ashley's voice dripped with practiced remorse. I tried really hard this time. Stop by later, Mr. Hollander murmured. We'll help you adjust that test score. Can't have our star student falling behind, can we? Chanel's blood ran cold. She waited until Ashley's designer boots had clicked their way out of the classroom before emerging from her hiding spot. Through the classroom window, she could see Ashley's satisfied smile as she joined her friends in the hallway. During lunch, Chanel made her way to Principal Lowe's office. The secretary's desk was empty, but she could hear voices inside the principal's office. She knocked firmly on the door. "Come in," Principal Lowe called out. Chanel entered to find him sitting behind his massive desk, perfectly pressed suit, making him look more like a CEO than a high school principal. "Mr. Lowe, I need to report something." He gestured to the chair across from him. "What seems to be the problem, Miss—" He paused, clearly searching for her name. "Tyson. Chanel Tyson." She sat down, back straight. "I overheard Mr. Hollander offering to change Ashley Trent's test scores." Principal Lowe's expression didn't change, but his fingers began drumming on his desk. "That's a very serious accusation, Miss Tyson. I heard him clearly. He told her to come back later to adjust her test." "I'm sure you misunderstood," Principal Lowe said, his voice smooth as glass. "Mr. Hollander is one of our most respected teachers. He often offers extra help to struggling students. But, unless you have concrete evidence," he continued, "I'd suggest being very careful about making such claims. They could be considered defamatory." The threat in his tone was unmistakable. Chanel felt her hopes deflating as she realized no help would come from this quarter. "Was there anything else?" Principal Lowe asked, already turning his attention to papers on his desk. "No, sir," Chanel replied quietly, standing up. As she left his office, she pulled out a small notebook from her backpack and began writing, her hand shaking slightly with anger. That evening, sitting cross-legged on her bed, Chanel flipped through the pages of her journal. She documented everything. Mr. Hollander's dismissive behavior, the unfair detention, Ashley's preferential treatment, the whispered conversation about changing grades, Principal Lowe's dismissal of her concerns. Under the warm glow of her desk lamp, she added a final entry for the day. "They protect each other. No one's coming." The words stared back at her from the page, stark and undeniable. She ran her hand over the cover of the notebook, feeling the texture of the cardboard beneath her fingers. Then, moving quietly, despite being alone in her room, she lifted her mattress and slid the journal underneath, making sure it was completely hidden from view. 2 days dragged by like molasses. Chanel kept her head down in AP Calculus, watching Ashley flutter her eyelashes at Mr. Hollander while getting extra help after every class. The unfairness of it all sat in her stomach like a stone. The afternoon bell had just rung when Mr. Rhodes's voice caught her attention. "Miss Tyson?" He stood in the empty hallway, leaning on his mop. "Got a minute?" Chanel nodded, clutching her backpack strap. The old janitor's eyes darted around before he spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "Been watching you these past few days. Wondering if you're noticing what I'm noticing?" She studied his weathered face. "What do you mean?" Mr. Rhodes propped his mop against the wall and pulled a rag from his pocket, pretending to wipe down the nearby trophy case. "Been here 28 years. Seen a lot of things. Way they treat certain students different than others." He paused, focusing intently on a particularly shiny trophy. "Especially in Hollander's class." Chanel's heart began to race. "You've seen something?" "Seen plenty." He moved to the next trophy, still not looking at her directly. "Last year, caught him handing Ashley Trent a manila envelope. Peeked inside when she dropped it later. Test answers, clear as day. Year before that, same thing with another cheerleader." The hallway suddenly felt too quiet, too exposed. Chanel lowered her voice. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Mr. Rhodes let out a dry laugh that held no humor. "Who's going to listen to an old black janitor? Principal Lowe? School board? I ain't got no badge or degree, just a mop." He finally turned to face her, eyes serious. "But you got something better. Got a brain and a backbone. They can't ignore that forever." Chanel thought about her hidden journal. "I've been keeping notes." "Smart girl." He nodded approvingly. "Keep doing that. Document everything. Dates, times, what was said. Never know when you might need it." A door slammed somewhere down the hall, making them both jump. Mr. Rhodes quickly resumed his cleaning, and Chanel pretended to check her phone. "Better get going," he muttered. "But remember what I said. You ain't alone in seeing what's happening here." That night, Chanel sat at her desk, laptop open to a blank document. Her journal lay beside it, filled with hurried notes about detention slips and whispered conversations. She began typing, organizing everything chronologically. September 15th. Solved equation correctly in class. Given detention for disruption. September 16th. Overheard Hollander offering to adjust Ashley's test scores. September 16th. Reported to Principal Lowe. No action taken. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she remembered Mr. Rhodes's words. She added, "Historical pattern. Mr. Rhodes witnessed similar incidents in previous years. Multiple white students received test materials in advance. The next morning, Chanel logged into the school's online portal to check her latest calculus test score. She blinked hard, certain she was seeing things wrong. The 97% she'd earned had somehow transformed into a 78%. Her hands trembled as she clicked through the test details. No explanations, no marked deductions, just a simple number change. The knot in her stomach tightened as she remembered Mr. Rhodes's advice about documentation. Moving quickly, she opened the screenshot tool on her computer. One click captured the original score, still visible in the Recent Grades section. Another screenshot showed the changed grade on the test detail page. The timestamps were clear. The change had happened overnight. She couldn't risk losing this evidence. Chanel created a new email draft, attached both screenshots, and typed her own email address. Her cursor hovered over the send button for just a moment before she clicked, watching the confirmation appear. Message sent. A notification popped up on her screen. The school portal was performing routine maintenance and would be down for the next hour. Chanel knew what that meant. By the time it came back online, all trace of her original grade would be gone. She glanced at the wall clock, still 15 minutes before first period. Opening her email, she verified the screenshots had arrived safely. Then she created a new folder labeled Physics Notes and moved the email there, hidden in plain sight, just like her journal. The hallway outside began filling with voices as students arrived for the day. Chanel could hear Ashley's laugh among them, probably already planning her next adjusted test score. But this time, evidence of their scheme was safely preserved. Mr. Hollander's classroom door creaked open across the hall. Chanel quickly closed her email and gathered her books, the weight of the hidden screenshots like armor around her. They could change the numbers, but they couldn't erase the truth. Not anymore. The morning announcements crackled over the intercom as students filed into their first period classes. Chanel took her seat in AP Calculus, watching Mr. Hollander arrange papers on his desk with precise, methodical movements. He smiled at Ashley as she bounced into the room. Then his eyes slid past Chanel as if she were invisible. The fluorescent lights hummed in the empty classroom as Chanel settled into her usual seat. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, determined to stay focused despite yesterday's grade tampering. The classroom smelled of chalk dust and industrial cleaner, a combination that usually made her feel ready to learn. Today, it just made her anxious. Mr. Hollander's footsteps echoed in the hallway before he appeared, briefcase swinging at his side. His eyes narrowed when he spotted her, jaw tightening beneath his neatly trimmed beard. He took his time arranging papers on his desk, straightening already straight stacks with precise movements. As other students filtered in, chattering about weekend plans, Mr. Hollander cleared his throat. "Let's all stay humble today. he announced, staring directly at Chanel. "Some of us need to remember our place in this classroom." Ashley snickered from her front row seat, twirling her blonde hair around one finger. The message was clear. Chanel wasn't welcome to participate anymore. The morning dragged on as Mr. Hollander worked through a particularly complex integral problem on the whiteboard. His marker squeaked as he wrote, calling on students at random. "Ashley? Michael? Jennifer?" Each time, he pointedly skipped over Chanel's raised hand. Chanel watched in growing frustration as he made a crucial error in the equation. Her pencil snapped in her grip as he confidently wrote down the wrong solution. Before she could stop herself, her voice cut through the silence. "That's not right," she said. "You forgot to account for the negative coefficient." The marker froze mid-stroke. Mr. Hollander turned slowly, his face flushing red beneath his carefully controlled expression. "Excuse me. The solution is incorrect," Chanel repeated, softer now, but still clear. "If you check the—" "I don't appreciate your hostile tone, Miss Tyson." His voice dripped with barely contained anger. "This kind of disrespectful behavior will not be tolerated in my classroom. But I'm just trying to—" "Enough!" He slammed the marker down. "One more word, and you'll be spending another week in detention. Is that what you want?" The class sat in uncomfortable silence. A few students shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Ashley's smirk grew wider. When the bell finally rang, Chanel gathered her books quickly, hoping to escape. But Mr. Hollander's voice stopped her at the door. "A word, Miss Tyson." The other students filed out, leaving them alone. Mr. Hollander leaned against his desk, arms crossed. His previous anger had transformed into something colder, more calculated. "You people always think being smart earns you something," he said quietly. "Always pushing, always trying to prove yourselves superior. It's exhausting, really." Chanel felt her body go rigid. The words, "you people," echoed in her head like a slap. She stood frozen, clutching her textbook like a shield. "I've been teaching longer than you've been alive," he continued. "I know how to handle students who don't understand their proper place. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The hallway had never seemed so far away. Chanel managed a small nod before escaping, her heart pounding against her ribs. She barely remembered the rest of her classes, the words, "you people," playing on repeat in her mind. That evening, Chanel sat at the kitchen table while her mother heated up leftover lasagna. The words tumbled out between shaky breaths as she recounted what happened. Wanda's face hardened as she listened, her nurse's ID badge still hanging around her neck from her day shift. She grabbed the phone immediately, dialing the school's number with sharp jabs of her finger. "This is Wanda Tyson, Chanel's mother," she said, her voice calm but steel-edged. "I'm calling about Mr. Hollander's inappropriate behavior today." Chanel could hear Principal Lowe's muffled voice through the receiver, making excuses. Her mother's expression grew darker. "What do you mean there's no record?" Wanda demanded. "My daughter was there. She heard every word." Another pause. "So you're saying she's lying?" The conversation continued for several minutes, going nowhere. Finally, Wanda hung up, her hands gripping the kitchen counter until her knuckles went white. "They're covering for him," she said finally, "claiming there's no record of any misconduct. Said it's your word against his." She turned to face Chanel, determination replacing anger in her eyes. "We need to be smarter about this. Document everything from now on, every word, every interaction. We'll give them no excuses, no way to twist this around." Chanel nodded, pulling out her phone. Her hands shook slightly as she searched the App Store, finding a voice recorder with good reviews. The installation took only moments. In her bedroom later that night, she practiced activating the recorder through her jacket pocket. Click, record, stop. Click, record, stop. The movements became automatic, muscle memory taking over. She played back the test recordings, making sure the audio was clear even through fabric. "You people," Mr. Hollander's voice echoed in her memory. Next time, she'd be ready. Next time, there would be proof. Chanel's fingers trembled as she pressed record on her phone, tucking it carefully into her jacket pocket. The device felt heavy against her chest, like a secret weapon. She'd practiced all weekend, making sure she could start and stop it without looking obvious. The hallway buzzed with Monday morning energy as students shuffled to their first classes. Every step toward Mr. Hollander's classroom made her heart beat faster. She touched the phone through her pocket one last time, drawing strength from its presence. Ashley and her friends blocked the doorway, giggling over something on a phone screen. Chanel squeezed past them, catching a glimpse of what looked suspiciously like test answers. She made a mental note to add that to her growing collection of evidence. The classroom smelled different today. Someone had used strong cleaning spray on the whiteboards, making the air sharp and chemical. Chanel settled into her seat, arranging her notebook and calculator with precise movements. Each item lined up perfectly straight, a small attempt at controlling something in this increasingly hostile space. Mr. Hollander swept in just as the bell rang, his usual pressed shirt and tie making him look more like a businessman than a teacher. He carried himself with the confident air of someone who'd never faced consequences for his actions. "Pop quiz," he announced, smirking as groans filled the room. "Let's see who's been paying attention and who's been—" His eyes fixed on Chanel. Relying on other advantages. The quiz problems were harder than usual. Chanel worked through them methodically, double-checking each step. Around her, she could hear frustrated sighs and eraser scratches. Ashley kept glancing at her phone under the desk. "Time's up," Mr. Hollander called after 20 minutes. He collected the papers, making a show of shuffling them. "Though I suppose some of you might need extra time. The school board does love their special accommodations these days." A few students laughed nervously. Chanel kept her face neutral, even as anger burned in her chest. The phone pressed against her ribs, capturing every word. "Speaking of which," Mr. Hollander continued, walking between the desks, "I've been thinking about our calculator policy." He picked up someone's graphing calculator, turning it over in his hands. "Maybe we should start providing affirmative action calculators. You know, the kind that give certain students—" He paused for effect, glancing at Chanel. "An extra boost when they can't quite measure up naturally." More uncomfortable laughter. Someone whispered, "That's messed up," just loud enough to hear. Chanel's pencil pressed so hard against her paper it nearly tore through. The rest of class passed in a blur of equations and barely concealed hostility. When the bell finally rang, Chanel waited until everyone left before stopping the recording. Her hands shook as she played back the first few seconds to make sure it worked. After school, she met Darnell Briggs at their usual spot, the old picnic tables behind the gym where security cameras didn't reach. He'd graduated last year, or should have, before the school expelled him for academic dishonesty that everyone knew he hadn't committed. Darnell looked exactly like she remembered, tall and lanky in his worn jean jacket, with eyes that had seen too much too young. He'd been the top student in computer science before they pushed him out. "Let's hear it," he said without preamble. Chanel played the recording. Darnell's expression darkened with each snide comment, each coded phrase dripping with prejudice. When it finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring at the brick wall behind her. "This school hasn't changed," he finally said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "Same games, different players. You know you're next if you don't protect yourself, right?" "I know." Chanel pulled out her notebook, showing him her detailed timeline of events. "I've been documenting everything." Darnell nodded approvingly. "Good start, but we need more. Times, dates, witnesses. Every grade change, every lost assignment, every time he helps white students cheat. Build it like a legal case, because that's what it might become. You think it could go that far? They destroyed my future over nothing, Darnell said flatly. Killed my college chances, my internship offers, everything. Don't let them do it to you, too. They spent the next hour planning. Darnell showed her how to back up recordings to secure cloud storage, how to document metadata that proved when files were created. His fingers flew over her phone screen, setting up encrypted folders and backup systems. Your word against his isn't enough, he explained. They'll say you're being oversensitive, playing the race card. But data? Numbers? That's harder to ignore. The sun was setting by the time they finished, casting long shadows across the empty school grounds. Chanel's phone now had 3 different backup systems and a folder full of documentation templates. Back home, she transferred everything to her computer, then locked her phone in her desk drawer. The recording felt like a loaded gun, powerful but dangerous if mishandled. She had to be smart about this, strategic. One wrong move, and she'd end up like Darnell, pushed out and powerless. Standing in her quiet bedroom, surrounded by the math books and academic awards that marked her as a target, Chanel whispered to herself, "I'm not going anywhere." Her voice was steady, certain. She'd earned her place in that classroom, and no one, not even Mr. Hollander, would take it from her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Hollow Brook High's empty hallways. Most students had left for the day, but Chanel lingered, pretending to need extra help with a problem set. She'd noticed a pattern. Ashley always stayed late on Thursdays, and not for studying. Chanel's footsteps echoed against the worn linoleum as she approached the math lab. The sound of hushed voices made her pause. She pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding. Through the small window in the door, she could see Mr. Hollander and Ashley inside. They stood close together near his desk, Ashley twirling her blonde hair, while Mr. Hollander reached into his briefcase. The fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and artificial. Chanel slowly pulled out her phone, making sure the sound was off. "You've been doing so well lately," Mr. Hollander said, his voice carrying through the thin door. "It would be a shame to see your grades slip now." Ashley giggled, the sound grating against Chanel's ears. "I just want to keep my spot as first in class. Colleges look at that stuff, you know?" "Of course they do." Mr. Hollander pulled out a manila envelope, sealed with tape. "These will keep you right where you belong. Just remember our arrangement. Discretion is key." Chanel's fingers trembled as she positioned her phone. The glass was dirty, but the image was clear enough. Mr. Hollander handing Ashley the envelope, both their faces visible. She took several photos in quick succession, careful to capture the exchange from different angles. "Thanks, Mr. H," Ashley said, stuffing the envelope into her designer backpack. "You're literally the best teacher ever." Chanel's stomach churned at the fake sweetness in Ashley's voice. She quickly ducked around the corner as they moved toward the door, her heart hammering so loud she was sure they'd hear it. "Remember," Mr. Hollander's voice grew serious, "if anyone asks, you were getting extra help with derivatives." Their footsteps faded down the hallway. Chanel waited until she couldn't hear them anymore before pulling out her phone again. Her hands shook as she texted the photos to Darnell. "Got proof," she typed. "Clear shot of both faces, plus envelope exchange." His response came immediately. "Holy shit. Don't delete anything. Come to my place now." 20 minutes later, Chanel sat at Darnell's kitchen table, both of them hunched over her phone. The house smelled like coffee and old books. Darnell's mom was an English teacher at another school, and every surface held stacks of novels and papers. "This is exactly what we needed," Darnell said, examining the photos. "But we need more. A pattern, not just one incident. Mr. Rhodes might help, Chanel suggested. "He sees everything that happens in that school." "The janitor?" Darnell nodded slowly. "Smart. He's got access to the whole building, and nobody pays attention to him." They spent the next hour planning. Darnell showed her how to set up an anonymous email account through a secure server. They created a detailed schedule of Ashley's tutoring sessions and Mr. Hollander's free periods. "We need to be careful," Darnell warned. "One mistake, and they'll bury this faster than they buried my case." The next morning, Chanel arrived early to find Mr. Rhodes. He was in the main hallway, methodically mopping the floor in long, even strokes. His gray uniform blended into the walls, making him nearly invisible, exactly what they needed. "Mr. Rhodes," she said quietly, "can we talk?" He glanced around before leading her to the supply closet. The small space smelled of cleaning products and old dust. "About yesterday?" he asked. "I saw them too." Chanel blinked in surprise. "You did?" "Been watching that snake for years," Rhodes said, his voice bitter. "Always Thursday afternoons. Always sealed envelopes. Would you help us?" Chanel explained their plan to document everything. Rhodes leaned on his mop handle, considering. "Been waiting 20 years for someone brave enough to take him down." He nodded slowly. "I'll keep watch. Let you know when they're meeting." Over the next few days, they built their case. Mr. Rhodes texted Chanel whenever he spotted suspicious meetings. She photographed more envelope exchanges, recorded conversations through open doors, documented every instance of favoritism and discrimination. Darnell helped organize everything into a clear timeline, adding his own experience from the previous year. They gathered testimonies from other students who'd been targeted, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. By Thursday night, they had enough. Chanel sat at her desk, staring at the encrypted email they'd prepared for the school board. Everything was attached: photos, recordings, testimonies, grade records showing suspicious patterns of changes. "Just hit send," Darnell encouraged over the phone. "No turning back now." Chanel took a deep breath and clicked the button. The email disappeared into cyberspace, carrying years of secrets with it. She tried to sleep that night but couldn't. Every few minutes, she checked her phone, wondering if anyone had seen the evidence yet. Around midnight, a notification lit up her screen. A breaking news alert from the local station. "Breaking news: allegations of systemic cheating and grade fixing at Hollowbrook High School." The headline glowed in the darkness of her room. Below it, a grainy version of one of her photos showed Mr. Hollander handing something to Ashley. The story was already spreading, picking up momentum like a boulder rolling downhill. Chanel stared at her phone, her heart racing. The truth was out there now, impossible to ignore or hide. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. The morning air crackled with tension as Chanel walked into Hollowbrook High. Students clustered in tight groups, their voices dropping to whispers as she passed. Through the main entrance windows, she saw news vans parked along the curb, reporters standing with microphones at the ready. Inside, the usual morning routine had shattered. Teachers huddled near the staff room, their faces tight with concern. Mr. Hollander's classroom door remained locked, the lights off inside. A substitute teacher hovered nearby, looking lost. "Did you see the news?" A freshman whispered too loudly to his friend. "They caught someone cheating." "Not someone," another student replied. "Like a whole system of it." The morning announcements crackled over the intercom. Principal Lowe's voice strained as he ordered all students and staff to the gymnasium for an emergency assembly. The halls filled with the sound of shuffling feet and nervous chatter. Chanel found a spot in the bleachers near the back, watching as Ashley entered with her cheerleader friends. Gone was her usual confident strut. Instead, Ashley's face was pale, her hands fidgeting with her phone. She kept glancing at the gym doors as if expecting Mr. Hollander to walk in. Principal Lowe stepped up to the microphone, his usual smooth demeanor showing cracks. His tie was slightly crooked, and sweat beaded on his forehead under the fluorescent lights. "Good morning, Hollowbrook family," he began, his voice echoing. "As many of you may have seen in the news, serious allegations have been made regarding academic integrity at our school. I want to assure you that we are taking these claims very seriously." The gym hummed with whispered conversations. Lowe cleared his throat loudly. "One staff member has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." His eyes swept across the crowd. "I want to emphasize that these are only allegations at this point. Nothing has been proven." Ashley's phone slipped from her trembling hands, clattering on the bleachers. Several students turned to look at her. She quickly snatched it up, her cheeks flushing red. "We pride ourselves on academic excellence here at Hollowbrook," Lowe continued. "Any suggestion of impropriety will be thoroughly investigated. However, we must not let these allegations distract us from our daily pursuit of education." Chanel noticed Mr. Rhodes at the back of the gym, leaning on his mop. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her an almost imperceptible nod. After the assembly, Chanel headed to her locker. A yellow envelope was stuck through the vent slots. Inside, she found an official invitation to represent Hollowbrook High at the State Mathematics Championship. Her perfect GPA and outstanding performance in AP Calculus had earned her the spot. She stared at the invitation, emotions warring inside her. This was what she'd worked for, a chance to prove herself on a bigger stage. But now, with everything happening, it felt complicated. During lunch, Ashley's usual table was oddly quiet. The cheerleader sat alone, picking at her food, jumping every time someone walked past. When she noticed Chanel looking, Ashley's face twisted into a snarl before she quickly gathered her things and fled the cafeteria. That evening, Chanel sat at her kitchen table studying the competition details while her mother prepared dinner. The rhythmic sound of Wanda's knife chopping vegetables provided a steady backdrop to her thoughts. "Made the news today," Wanda said, not looking up from her cutting board. "Your principal's face was all over Channel 5. "He tried to make it sound like nothing," Chanel replied, turning a page in the competition packet. "Like it was just a small problem they'd fix quietly." Wanda set down her knife, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Baby, you need to listen to me carefully." She sat down across from Chanel, her nurse's scrubs still on from her day shift. "This isn't over. Men like Hollander and Lowe, they don't just accept defeat. They'll come back meaner than before." "I got invited to the state math competition," Chanel said, sliding the invitation across the table. Wanda picked it up, reading it carefully. "This is good news, but you watch your back. They'll be looking for any excuse to discredit you now." "I'm going to win it," Chanel said firmly. "No tricks, no help, just me and the math. They can't take that away." Over the next 3 days, Chanel threw herself into preparation. She worked through practice problems during lunch, studied old competition questions after school, and filled her journal with notes and strategies. Mr. Rhodes would sometimes leave newspaper clippings about the investigation in her locker. More students were coming forward with stories about grade fixing and favoritism. On the morning of the competition, Chanel double-checked her backpack. Her journal was tucked safely inside, along with her phone containing all the evidence they'd gathered. She hadn't deleted anything, despite Darnell's suggestion to store it somewhere safer. These weren't just photos and recordings anymore. They were her protection. The yellow school bus waited in the parking lot, its engine humming in the early morning air. A few other students from the math team were already boarding, their faces showing a mix of excitement and nervousness. None of them spoke to Chanel as she climbed the steps. She chose a seat near the middle, placing her backpack carefully beside her. Through the window, she could see her mother standing by her car, watching. Wanda raised her hand in a small wave, her face serious. They both knew this competition was about more than just math now. The state competition auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Hundreds of students filled the rows, their calculators and pencils lined up on desks like soldiers ready for battle. Chanel sat straight-backed in her chair, taking slow, measured breaths to calm her racing heart. The air conditioning hummed overhead, making the papers on her desk flutter slightly. All around her, students from wealthy private schools and prestigious academies whispered amongst themselves. Their blazers bore embroidered crests, their calculators the latest models. Chanel glanced down at her own well-worn calculator, the one her mother had saved 3 paychecks to buy when she first started AP Calculus. "Welcome to the 43rd Annual Georgia State Mathematics Championship," announced a gray-haired woman at the podium. "You represent the brightest young minds in our state. Today's competition consists of 3 rounds: individual problem-solving, team challenges, and finally, our lightning round." Chanel's fingers traced the edge of her desk as she listened to the rules. The first set of problems appeared on the screen at the front of the auditorium. Her heart steadied as she read through them. Numbers had always been her sanctuary, pure, logical, unchangeable by prejudice or power. The first round flew by in a blur of equations and formulas. Chanel's pencil moved steadily across her paper, each solution flowing naturally into the next. While others around her erased frantically or chewed their pencils, she maintained her rhythm. These problems weren't just numbers to her. They were stepping stones to something bigger. During the team round, she was paired with students from other schools. Initially, they eyed her Hollowbrook High t-shirt with skepticism, but their attitudes shifted as she quickly identified key patterns in the problems. One boy from a private academy in Atlanta actually whistled when she solved a particularly complex integration problem in half the expected time. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, genuine admiration in his voice. "I just see it," Chanel replied quietly, already moving on to the next equation. The lightning round was where she truly shined. Question after question flashed on the screen, each requiring split-second thinking and perfect execution. Chanel's hand shot up consistently, her answers clear and confident. With each correct response, the whispers in the audience grew louder. When the final scores were tallied, there was no debate. Chanel had achieved the highest combined score across all 3 rounds, a feat that hadn't been accomplished by any student from a public school in over a decade. The head judge, a mathematics professor from Georgia Tech, called her name with evident surprise. "First place, with a near-perfect score, Chanel Tyson, Hollowbrook High School." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous level. As Chanel walked to the stage, she caught glimpses of faces in the audience, some amazed, some confused, some genuinely happy for her. The trophy they handed her was heavier than she expected, its golden surface catching the stage lights. Cameras flashed from the local news crews who had come to cover the event. For once, Chanel didn't shy away from the attention. She stood tall, holding her trophy, thinking of her mother's sacrifices, of Mr. Rhodes's quiet support, of every doubtful look and dismissive comment she'd endured. The drive home felt surreal. The trophy sat in her lap, its weight grounding her in the moment. Outside her window, Georgia pine trees blurred past as the bus carried her back to Hollowbrook. She thought about texting her mother but decided to surprise her instead. When the bus pulled into the school parking lot, Chanel wasn't prepared for what she saw. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors from their street, some of her classmates, even a few teachers. At the front stood her mother, holding a bouquet of yellow roses, her nurse's scrubs suggesting she'd come straight from her shift. "That's my girl," Wanda called out as Chanel stepped off the bus. Her voice carried that special mix of pride and fierceness that only mothers can achieve. "That's my baby." The neighbors clapped and cheered. Mrs. Jackson from 2 doors down had brought her famous lemon cake. Mr. Washington, who ran the corner store where Chanel bought her school supplies, beamed with grandfatherly pride. For the first time since she could remember, Chanel felt truly seen in her own community. "You did this on your own merit," Wanda whispered as she hugged her daughter. "No one can take that away from you." They celebrated at home that evening, the trophy placed proudly on their small mantel. The house filled with the warmth of well-wishers and the smell of home-cooked food. Chanel sat on their worn couch, watching her mother laugh with the neighbors, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. As the sky darkened and guests began to leave, Chanel helped her mother clean up the paper plates and cups. The yellow roses sat in a vase on their kitchen table, a bright splash of color against their modest surroundings. "I know what this means to you," Wanda said softly as they worked. "But more importantly, I know what it means for every kid coming up behind you." Chanel nodded, understanding the weight of her victory. She wasn't just a student who won a math competition, she was proof that talent and determination could break through barriers. At 10:42 p.m., just as she was getting ready for bed, her phone buzzed. The school's number flashed on the screen, followed by a message that made her stomach drop. "Urgent. We need to talk about your score discrepancies. Please report to the office tomorrow morning." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Chanel pushed open the heavy door to the main office. Her footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, each step feeling like she was walking through molasses. Principal Lowe sat behind his massive oak desk, flanked by two stern-faced board members in dark suits. Their expressions were as cold as the air conditioning that blasted through the vents. "Miss Tyson, please sit down." Principal Lowe gestured to the small chair in front of his desk, making her feel like a child about to be scolded. His usual smooth smile was replaced by what looked like rehearsed concern. Chanel's competition trophy glinted mockingly from a side table, where it had been displayed just yesterday. Now it seemed to mock her, its golden surface dulled under the harsh office lighting. "We've received some troubling information," the female board member began, her voice clipped and precise. She wore a pearl necklace that she kept touching nervously. "An anonymous source has provided evidence suggesting irregularities in your competition performance." Chanel's chest tightened. "What kind of irregularities?" Principal Lowe cleared his throat, shuffling papers on his desk without actually looking at them. "The tip suggests you had access to the competition problems beforehand. There are also concerns about your sudden improvement in performance compared to your recent test scores." "My recent scores?" Chanel's voice cracked. "The ones Mr. Hollander changed?" The male board member's eyebrows shot up. "That's a serious accusation, young lady. One that's been thoroughly investigated and dismissed." Chanel felt heat rising in her face. "But I have proof." "What we have," Principal Lowe cut her off, "is concrete evidence that your competition scores are statistically improbable given your academic history." He slid a graph across the desk. It showed her grades over the past semester, including the artificially lowered ones. The competition score stood out like a mountain peak among valleys. "This isn't right." Chanel's hands trembled as she tried to pull up the saved screenshots on her phone. "I can show you my original grades." "That won't be necessary," the female board member interrupted. "The competition board has already made their decision. Your award is being revoked." The words hit Chanel like physical blows. Each syllable knocked more air from her lungs. "Furthermore," Principal Lowe continued, his voice taking on an almost sympathetic tone that made it worse, "we're required to flag your transcript for academic dishonesty. You'll be suspended pending a full disciplinary hearing." Chanel sat perfectly still, her mind racing through calculations like it always did when she was stressed. The probability of this happening right after her victory. The timing of the anonymous tip. The convenient graph showing doctored grades. "My mother needs to be here," she managed to say. "We've already called her," Principal Lowe replied. "She's on her way. In the meantime, Please surrender your phone and any other electronic devices." 20 minutes later, Wanda Tyson burst through the office door like a hurricane in nursing scrubs. Her eyes blazed as she took in the scene. Her daughter, small and silent in the chair, the administrators arranged like a tribunal. "What is this?" Wanda demanded, moving to stand behind Chanel's chair. Her hand came to rest protectively on her daughter's shoulder. They repeated their accusations, showing Wanda the same graphs and citing the same anonymous source. With each word, Chanel felt her mother's grip tighten on her shoulder. "So let me get this straight." Wanda's voice was deadly quiet. "My daughter wins fair and square, embarrasses some people who didn't expect it, and suddenly there's an anonymous tip, and you're using grades that we know were tampered with as evidence?" "Mrs. Tyson," Principal Lowe started, "we understand this is upsetting." "Upsetting?" Wanda laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, sir. Upsetting is working a double shift. This is criminal." They left the office with a suspension notice and a hearing date. Chanel's phone remained confiscated, her locker sealed for investigation. The trophy sat abandoned on the side table, already gathering dust. In the parking lot, they found Mr. Rhodes waiting by their car. His weathered face was creased with worry. "They're trying to bury it all," he said quietly, looking over his shoulder. "This morning, they had me clear out Mr. Hollander's whole office. Files, computer, everything gone." Wanda's jaw clenched. "They planned this. The second she won that competition, they had to take her down," Mr. Rhodes agreed. "Can't have their whole system exposed." They drove home in tense silence, but their phones started ringing as soon as they walked through the door. Darnell had already heard and came rushing over. "They can't erase the truth if you still have it," he insisted, pacing their small living room. "We made copies of everything, remember? The recordings, the screenshots, all of it." But Chanel barely heard him. She sat on the couch, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of every dismissive look, every misunderstanding, every "let's give someone else a chance" crushing down on her. Later that evening, she stood alone in the school hallway, having convinced the security guard to let her get some books from her locker. The honor board hung on the wall nearby, a pristine white surface with carefully printed names in black and gold. Where her name had been yesterday, there was now just a blank space, carefully painted over. Chanel stood there in the empty hallway, her hands curled into fists at her sides. Her whole body trembled with silent rage as she stared at that blank space, that erasure, that attempt to make her disappear. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the wall, and she felt the fury build in her chest like a mathematical equation reaching its inevitable conclusion. The morning sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds as Wanda Tyson rushed to her car, dark circles under her eyes betraying her sleepless night. Her nursing uniform was slightly wrinkled, something that never happened, and her usually neat hair was hastily pulled back. Empty coffee cups littered her desk at home, surrounding her laptop where dozens of drafted emails to lawyers and news outlets waited to be sent. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking from too much caffeine and too little rest. Her phone buzzed. Another email from another civil rights attorney. "Thank you for your inquiry, but our caseload is currently full." The hospital corridors felt different that morning. Whispers followed her, colleagues averting their eyes. By the nurses' station, Dr. Harrison Walsh, who also sat on the hospital board, gestured her into his office. "Wanda, please close the door," he said, not looking up from his papers. His voice carried that artificial concern that reminded her of Principal Lowe. "There are some concerns about your recent activities." Wanda stood straight, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "My activities?" "This situation with your daughter's school." He shuffled papers on his desk. "It's creating waves in the community." Several board members are worried about potential negative publicity affecting the hospital. My daughter was wrongly accused. Your performance review is coming up, he cut in smoothly. 15 years of excellent service. It would be a shame to see that record questioned. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Wanda's hands clenched into fists behind her back. Are you threatening my job because I'm defending my daughter? I'm suggesting you consider the bigger picture. He finally looked up, his expression carefully neutral. These things have a way of affecting everyone involved. Meanwhile, across town, Chanel walked through Hollowbrook High's empty halls, a security guard trailing behind her like she was a criminal. Her footsteps echoed against the lockers. Students peeked through classroom windows, whispering behind their hands. Her locker stood open, already half-emptied by the administration's investigation. As she reached for her remaining books, a familiar voice floated from the math lab across the hall. Mr. Hollander was back, teaching as if nothing had happened. His smug tone carried through the door as he praised Ashley's latest improvement. Chanel's hands trembled as she shoved notebooks into her backpack. The security guard checked his watch impatiently. Miss Tyson. Mr. Rhodes's quiet voice made her jump. He stood at the end of the hall, mop in hand, pretending to clean. His eyes darted to the security guard. Would you help me move some boxes before you go? For the recycling? The guard sighed but followed them to the janitor's closet. Mr. Rhodes disappeared inside and emerged with a small cardboard box. Mind helping me carry this to the dumpster? He asked the guard. Miss Tyson can gather her things. Won't be but a minute. The guard hesitated, then nodded, following Mr. Rhodes around the corner. The moment they disappeared, Mr. Rhodes slipped back, speaking quickly and quietly. Security system backs up to an old hard drive in the basement, he whispered. They forgot about it years ago when they upgraded, but it still records. Every camera, every day. Chanel's heart began to race. The math lab. 2 weeks of footage. He pressed a USB drive into her hand. Last Tuesday, 4:15 p.m. Watch it at home. Footsteps approached. Mr. Wirtz. Rhodes vanished back around the corner, his voice carrying as he discussed recycling protocol with the guard. At home, Chanel's hands shook as she plugged the drive into her laptop. The footage was grainy but clear enough. The timestamp showed 4:15 p.m. last Tuesday. The math lab appeared empty at first. Then Ashley slipped in, looking over her shoulder. Mr. Hollander followed, standing watch at the door. Ashley moved to his desk, opened a filing cabinet with a key he handed her. She pulled out folders, started taking photos with her phone. Test papers, answer keys, future exams. Mr. Hollander checked the hall again, then pointed to specific pages. Ashley nodded, photographing each one. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. Before they left, Mr. Hollander patted Ashley's shoulder, his self-satisfied smile visible even in the grainy footage. Chanel's vision blurred with tears of rage as she watched. Her hands shook so badly she could barely operate the mouse to replay the sequence. Every dismissal, every accusation, every time they'd called her a cheater, while this had been happening all along. The footage continued, showing other days, other students, always the same ones, slipping in after hours. Mr. Hollander supervising, providing access, ensuring his favorites maintained their perfect grades while students like Chanel were pushed down. She sat back in her chair, tears streaming down her face, the evidence playing on an endless loop before her. The silent black-and-white footage felt like a confession, like truth finally breaking through all their lies. In her hand, she clutched her phone, wondering who to call first. Her mother, Darnell, a lawyer, the news. The USB drive hummed quietly, holding irrefutable proof of everything they'd denied. On the screen, Ashley and Mr. Hollander moved like ghosts through their routine of deception, unaware they were creating the evidence of their own downfall. Chanel's fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling as she rewound the security footage for the 5th time. The grainy black-and-white video showed Ashley Trent slipping into the math lab while Mr. Hollander kept watch at the door. The timestamp in the corner blinked steadily. 4:15 p.m. They never thought anyone would look here, Mr. Rhodes said quietly, his weathered hands resting on the back of his chair in the cramped maintenance office. Ancient computer monitors hummed around them, gathering dust, but still faithfully recording everything. They installed the new system up front, but this old one kept running. Been recording every day for years. Chanel watched Ashley flip through the exam folders with practiced ease, her phone camera flashing as she photographed page after page. Mr. Hollander's smug expression was clear, even in the grainy footage, as he pointed out specific sections to copy. The maintenance office door creaked open, and Darnell slipped in, closing it carefully behind him. His eyes widened at the footage playing on the screen. "Man, they got sloppy," he muttered, leaning in closer. "Look at the dates." He pointed to the timestamp information. "That's the day before your calculus midterm, the one they accused you of cheating on." Chanel pulled up her documented timeline, comparing dates. They match perfectly. Every time Ashley got a perfect score, there's footage of her in the lab the day before. Mr. Rhodes retrieved several blank USB drives from his desk drawer. "Better make copies. Lots of them. They'll try to delete this as soon as they know we found it." Darnell's fingers flew across the keyboard, creating backup after backup. "I'm uploading it to secure cloud storage too. They can't touch it there." His face was grim with concentration. "This is exactly what happened to me last year. But they were careful. Didn't leave evidence like this." The afternoon light faded to evening as they worked, carefully documenting and saving everything. The door opened again, and Wanda entered, still in her nursing scrubs, looking exhausted but determined. "Sorry I'm late," she said, setting down her bag. "Had to finish my shift without looking suspicious." She glanced at Dr. Walsh's earlier threat, but straightened her shoulders. "My old colleague from Atlanta Memorial gave me a number. Civil rights attorney who specializes in education discrimination cases." Chanel turned the monitor so her mother could see. "Mom, look at this." Wanda watched in silence as the footage played, her expression hardening. When it finished, she pulled out her phone and dialed immediately. "Yes, this is Wanda Tyson," she said into the phone, her voice steady and professional. "I need to speak with attorney Marcus James. It's regarding systematic academic discrimination at Hollowbrook High School." She paused, listening. "Yes, we have video evidence. Multiple incidents." While Wanda spoke with the lawyer's office, Darnell finished creating the last backup. "Cloud upload's complete," he reported. "I've got it stored on 3 different secure servers." Mr. Rhodes nodded approvingly. "They can't bury this one." Through the small basement window, they could see students leaving after-school activities. Word had begun to spread. Whispered conversations about proof, about video footage, about justice finally coming. Several students slowed as they passed the maintenance office, trying to peek in. Wanda ended her call, her expression focused. "Attorney James wants to see everything tonight. He says this proves clear retaliation and systematic misconduct. He's requesting an emergency school board hearing." Chanel gathered the USB drives, carefully labeling each one. Her hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a calm certainty. The truth was saved, backed up, impossible to deny or delete. "Mr. Rhodes," she said quietly, "thank you for seeing everything all these years, for helping us prove it." The old janitor smiled sadly. "Sometimes the most important things happen where nobody's looking." He gestured to his ancient recording system. "Or where they think nobody's looking. They worked together, organizing the evidence into clear folders, dates, times, patterns of behavior. Darnell added his own documentation from the previous year, showing how long this had been going on. Mr. Rhodes contributed his written observations from years of watching similar incidents. Outside, the sun set behind the school buildings, casting long shadows through the small window. The hallways above fell silent as the last students left for the day. In the quiet maintenance office, Wanda attached the final file to an email addressed to Attorney James. Chanel watched the upload progress bar inch forward on her mother's phone screen. 85%, 90%, 95%. Each percentage felt like another nail in Mr. Hollander's carefully constructed system of favoritism and discrimination. The bar reached 100%. Sent. The truth was out there now, backed up and documented. Impossible to deny. Chanel looked at her allies in the small office, her fierce mother, loyal Darnell, observant Mr. Rhodes, and felt a profound sense of certainty. The evidence was secure. The real fight could begin. The morning air felt sharp and clean as Chanel stood across from Hollowbrook High, watching the sun creep over the brick building. She wasn't wearing her usual school clothes. Instead, she'd chosen a crisp white button-down shirt and dark slacks. Professional. Determined. Ready. Students began gathering around her and Darnell on the public sidewalk. Many carried handmade signs. Stop protecting racists. Education is a right. Justice for Chanel. More importantly, they carried papers. Dozens of documented incidents, screenshots, and testimonials collected over the past week. Marcus and Denise were expelled last year for being disruptive, Darnell said, gesturing to a small group of former students. Same pattern. They questioned things in class, got labeled as troublemakers. The expelled students nodded, clutching their own documentation. Cars started pulling up, parents who'd taken the morning off work after hearing about the evidence. Many wore their work uniforms, nurses like Wanda, mechanics, store managers, all standing together with their children. The crowd grew steadily, but remained calm and organized. Wanda moved through the gathering, speaking quietly with small groups. "We have security footage," she explained to a cluster of concerned mothers. "Multiple incidents of exam theft, grade manipulation, targeted harassment, all documented." Her voice was steady, professional. The same voice she used when explaining serious matters to patients' families. At 7:45 a.m., the first bell rang inside the school. Students began filing through the main entrance as usual, but this time, something was different. As each student passed through the doors, they checked their phones, reading messages that had circulated all night. Principal Lowe stood in the lobby, his usual smooth smile looking strained as he greeted incoming students. "Good morning! Good morning!" he called out, watching the growing crowd across the street with visible concern. At exactly 8 a.m., the second bell rang. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then, the front doors burst open. Students poured out, first in dozens, then in hundreds. Some were crying. Others walked with heads held high. Many joined the gathering crowd, while others simply sat on the front steps, refusing to enter their first period classes. "This is an unauthorized assembly," Principal Lowe's voice crackled over the outdoor speakers. "All students must return to—" The sound of news vans pulling up drowned out his words. Reporters emerged with cameras and microphones, alerted by Attorney James's office. They began interviewing students and parents, capturing story after story of discrimination and retaliation. "My daughter's grades were changed after she reported harassment," one mother told a reporter, holding up printed screenshots. "I was kicked off the math team for attitude problems when I started winning competitions," a tall boy explained to another camera. Through a second-floor window, Mr. Hollander's face appeared, then quickly vanished. The blinds snapped shut, but not before Chanel caught his expression. Shock mixed with fear. His carefully constructed system was crumbling in real time. More parents arrived, including some of Ashley's friends' families, looking confused and angry as they read through copies of the evidence being distributed. The crowd now filled the entire block. "This is a peaceful demonstration," Wanda announced clearly, her voice carrying across the gathering. "We are exercising our right to protest systematic discrimination. We have evidence. We have witnesses. We demand accountability." Darnell coordinated with student leaders, making sure everyone had water and stayed calm. He'd been preparing for this moment since his own expulsion, gathering names, dates, patterns of behavior. Now it was all coming to light. Police cruisers arrived with lights flashing, but instead of confronting the protesters, they began directing traffic around the growing media presence. News vans lined both sides of the street. A helicopter circled overhead. "Ms. Tyson!" Principal Lowe called out, approaching the sidewalk with forced casualness. "Perhaps we could discuss this in my office. I assure you everything is under review." "No more private meetings," Wanda replied firmly. "No more reviews behind closed doors. This happens in public now." More students continued joining the crowd. Ashley stood frozen at the top of the front steps, watching her classmates leave. Her face shifted from confusion to dawning horror as she realized how many people knew what had happened in the math lab. Teachers appeared in windows, some looking concerned, others nodding in silent support. Mr. Rhodes stood in the doorway, quietly observing everything, his years of careful watching finally validated. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the scene. Hundreds of students, parents, and community members standing together, sharing stories of injustice finally brought to light. News crews captured it all. The signs, the tears, the determination. Chanel stood with her mother, watching as more police arrived to manage traffic and ensure everyone's safety. She felt simultaneously small and enormous. One student who'd refused to stay quiet, now at the center of a movement years in the making. "You okay?" Wanda asked softly, squeezing her daughter's hand. Chanel nodded, watching another news van park. "I just hope they listen this time." "Oh, they'll listen," Darnell said, joining them. "They don't have a choice anymore. The truth's too loud to ignore now." The crowd continued to grow as the morning unfolded. Police officers established a perimeter, not to contain the protesters, but to protect their right to be heard. News crews set up equipment for live broadcasts. The story was spreading beyond Hollowbrook High's walls, beyond their small town, becoming something bigger than any of them had imagined. The school auditorium buzzed with tension as hundreds packed the rows. News cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking in the dimness. Chanel sat with her mother in the front row, directly facing the long table where 7 school board members arranged their papers with grave expressions. Mr. Hollander sat alone at a small table to the left, his usual smug demeanor replaced by tight-lipped anxiety. Principal Lowe occupied a similar table on the right, repeatedly adjusting his tie. The room fell silent as Attorney James approached the podium, her heels clicking purposefully across the wooden stage. "Members of the board," she began, her voice clear and measured, "what you're about to see represents years of systematic discrimination and academic fraud at Hollowbrook High School." She nodded to a technician who lowered a projection screen. The security footage played in stark black and white. There was Ashley, slipping into the math lab after hours. Mr. Hollander appeared moments later, checking the hallway before closing the door. The timestamp matched exactly with the date of the midterm exam Chanel had been accused of cheating on. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ashley, sitting with her parents several rows back, sank lower in her seat. "Next, we have evidence of grade manipulation," Attorney James continued, displaying a series of screenshots. Note the systematic lowering of Ms. Tyson's scores, while other students' grades were artificially inflated. The images showed clear before and after comparisons of the digital gradebook. Mr. Rhodes approached the podium next, his work boots squeaking slightly. He stood straighter than usual, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "I've worked at Hollowbrook for 27 years, he began. "Seen a lot of things I wish I hadn't. But what happened to Chanel? That wasn't new. It was just the first time we could prove it." He described patterns he'd observed. Black students receiving harsher punishments, white students getting special help, missing exam papers mysteriously reappearing with perfect scores. "I kept quiet too long," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. But not anymore. Darnell's testimony came next. He stood tall in a pressed shirt, describing his own experience. "Last year, I questioned Mr. Hollander's grading. Next thing I know, I'm accused of threatening him. No evidence, no witnesses, just his word against mine. I was expelled 2 months before graduation." The board members leaned forward, examining documentation of Darnell's case. The disparities were obvious. Similar incidents involving white students had resulted in mere detentions. When Ashley was called to testify, she trembled visibly. Her previous confidence had evaporated under the weight of undeniable evidence. "Mr. Hollander said it was just extra help," she whispered into the microphone. "He said everyone does it, that some students just deserve more support." "Did you receive advance copies of exams?" Attorney James pressed. Ashley's eyes darted to Mr. Hollander, then back to her lap. "Yes," she admitted. "Multiple times." Mr. Hollander surged to his feet. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly—" "Mr. Hollander," the board chair interrupted, "you'll have your turn to speak." When that turn came, Mr. Hollander's denials grew increasingly desperate as Attorney James displayed email after email. Messages to Ashley about study sessions that coincided perfectly with stolen test answers. Correspondence with Principal Lowe, dismissing complaints from black parents. His own words condemning him. "These are clearly fabricated," he sputtered, but his face had gone pale. "The timestamps and digital signatures are authenticated," Attorney James replied calmly. "Would you like to revise your statement?" Mr. Hollander's composure cracked. "Those students needed the help. I was maintaining standards. You can't understand what it's like, teaching these—" He caught himself, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Principal Lowe tried a different approach when questioned, hiding behind policy and procedure. "All disciplinary actions followed established guidelines," he insisted. "Then please explain," Attorney James said, "why black students were 3 times more likely to be expelled under your leadership, while white students with similar infractions received minimal consequences." She displayed a chart comparing disciplinary actions by race. The pattern was unmistakable. Principal Lowe's professional mask slipped, revealing panic beneath. The board chairman called for a recess. As members filed out, the auditorium erupted in tense discussion. Chanel remained silent, watching Mr. Hollander stare blankly at his hands. All his power, all his carefully constructed superiority, had crumbled under the weight of truth. Wanda squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "Almost done," she whispered. "You did this. You made them see." The 20 minutes of recess felt like hours. Students whispered nervously. Parents checked phones and watched the doors. Reporters scribbled notes and adjusted cameras, preparing for the board's return. When the members finally re-entered, their faces were grim with purpose. The chairman approached the podium, adjusting his glasses. The room held its breath. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented today," he began, "this board has reached several immediate decisions. Mr. Kent Hollander's employment with the district is terminated, effective immediately. His case will be referred to the State Licensing Board for review and potential revocation of his teaching credentials. Mr. Hollander slumped in his chair as the chairman continued. Principal Avery Lowe is placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation of discriminatory practices under his leadership. An interim principal will be appointed by week's end. The room remained tensely silent, waiting for more. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Chanel and Wanda sat at their worn wooden table, 2 steaming mugs of coffee between them. Their phones buzzed simultaneously, official district emails arriving in a steady stream. Chanel's hands trembled as she opened the first message. "Mom," she whispered, her voice catching. "Look at this." Wanda leaned closer, reading over her daughter's shoulder. The district superintendent's letter was clear and unequivocal. After thorough review, all allegations against Chanel Tyson have been found baseless. Her academic record is hereby restored in full, including reinstatement as state mathematics competition champion. The district extends its sincere apologies for any distress caused. "Read that again," Wanda said, tears welling in her eyes. "Read it out loud." Chanel did, her voice growing stronger with each word. More emails followed, her competition scores officially validated, her permanent record cleared, her suspension expunged. The district's formal apology would be published in local papers. "There's more," Chanel said, scrolling through her inbox. College admissions officers had taken notice. 3 prestigious universities reached out directly, praising not just her academic achievements, but her courage in standing up to systemic abuse. "MIT wants to schedule an interview," she breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "They said my demonstrated leadership in confronting educational inequality aligns with their values." Wanda's phone chimed with its own message, a formal letter from the hospital board. "The threat to my job has been withdrawn," she said, relief evident in her voice. "They're actually apologizing for any inappropriate pressure applied by board members." The morning news played quietly on their small kitchen TV. A reporter stood outside Hollowbrook High, speaking into a microphone. "In a shocking development, systematic academic fraud and racial discrimination have been exposed at this local high school, thanks to the courage of one student whistleblower." Chanel's yearbook photo appeared on screen, alongside quotes from the school board hearing. The reporter continued. 17-year-old Chanel Tyson gathered evidence over months, documenting a pattern of discrimination that led to multiple staff dismissals and a district-wide investigation. "Turn it up," Wanda said, reaching for the remote. The news segment included clips from student interviews. "She stood up when nobody else would," one senior said. Everyone knew stuff was wrong, but Chanel actually proved it. Another email notification popped up on Chanel's phone. This one made her pause. "It's about Ashley," she said quietly. The message detailed the final disciplinary decisions. Ashley Trent was expelled for academic dishonesty, her college acceptance letters rescinded, the evidence of her repeated cheating with Mr. Dewey. Hollander's assistance was deemed overwhelming and inexcusable. "Good," Wanda said firmly. "Actions have consequences." Chanel sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of the past months finally beginning to lift. Her phone kept buzzing. Messages from classmates, social media notifications, more emails from colleges and educational organizations. "I need a minute," she said, pushing back from the table. She walked to her bedroom, where her competition trophy sat in a cardboard box, waiting to be restored to its rightful place. Carefully, she lifted it out. The golden figure seemed to shine brighter now, its victory untainted by false accusations. She placed it on her shelf, right next to the notebook where she'd documented everything. Every slight, every grade change, every discriminatory comment. The evidence journal sat beside it, its pages filled with dated entries, screenshots, and transcribed recordings. What had started as self-protection had become something much larger, proof that the truth, carefully gathered and bravely presented, could overcome even the most entrenched injustice. Wanda appeared in the doorway, holding a fresh cup of coffee. "You know what I'm proudest of?" she asked, watching her daughter arrange the display. "Not just that you won, but how you won. You didn't get loud or angry. You got smart. You gathered evidence. You built a case nobody could ignore." Chanel ran her fingers along the spine of her journal. "I almost gave up so many times," she admitted. "When they suspended me, when they tried to ruin your job." "But you didn't," Wanda reminded her. "You kept going. And now look!" She gestured to Chanel's phone, still lighting up with notifications. "Those colleges see exactly who you are. Not just smart, but strong. That's worth more than any trophy." Another email arrived, this one from the State Education Department. They were launching a broader investigation into similar patterns at other schools, citing Chanel's evidence as a model for documentation. "Your story's bigger than Hollowbrook now," Wanda said softly. "You've opened doors for other students to speak up." Chanel adjusted the trophy one last time, making sure it stood perfectly straight. Next to her journals and files, it wasn't just a symbol of mathematical achievement anymore. It represented something far more important: the power of persistence, the strength of truth, and the courage to stand firm when everything seemed stacked against you. "We should celebrate," Wanda suggested. "Call your friends, order dinner." But Chanel was already shaking her head. "Can we just sit here for a while? Just us?" After months of battles and public scrutiny, quiet victory felt sweeter than any celebration. Wanda smiled, understanding. They settled onto Chanel's bed, shoulders touching, watching the late morning sun paint shadows across the trophy's golden surface. Their phones continued buzzing with messages and congratulations, but for now, they simply breathed in the peace of vindication. Behind the heavy red curtain of Hollowbrook High's auditorium, Chanel stood in her crisp white graduation gown, clutching her mother's hand. The fabric felt cool and stiff against her skin, the gold honor cords heavy around her neck. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, drowning out Principal Thompson's opening speech. "You're shaking," Wanda whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand tighter. She looked elegant in her navy dress, her hospital badge still clipped to her purse. She'd come straight from her shift to be here. "Good shaking or nervous shaking?" Chanel asked, adjusting her cap for the 100th time. "Powerful shaking," Wanda corrected, smoothing a stray curl behind Chanel's ear. "The kind that comes before something big." Through gaps in the curtain, Chanel could see the packed auditorium. News cameras lined the back wall. The story of Hollowbrook's transformation had spread far beyond their small town, drawing attention from educational reformers and civil rights groups across the state. A student marshal appeared with his clipboard. "2 minutes, Miss Tyson." He smiled, genuine, respectful. The whole tone of the school had shifted these past months. Even the new principal, Dr. Thompson, had made systemic changes: transparent grading policies, anti-discrimination training, a complete overhaul of disciplinary procedures. The audience's applause faded as Principal Thompson cleared her throat. "It is my distinct honor to present our next graduate. This young woman's academic excellence speaks for itself. Perfect scores in advanced mathematics, early acceptance to multiple prestigious universities. But her contributions to our school community go far beyond academics." Chanel's grip tightened on her mother's hand. Through unwavering courage and dedication to truth, she exposed injustices that had gone unchallenged for too long. Her actions led to vital reforms that will benefit students for generations to come. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Chanel Marie Tyson. The audience erupted. As Chanel stepped through the curtain, the entire assembly rose to their feet. The thunderous applause washed over her like a wave. Camera flashes sparkled through the air. Near the back, she spotted Darnell standing tall beside Mr. Rhodes. The old janitor had traded his gray work suit for a pressed black jacket. They both beamed with pride. Darnell raised his fist slightly, their old signal of solidarity. Walking across the stage, Chanel's mind flashed back to that first day in calculus, when she'd dared to raise her hand. How far they'd all come since then. The maple floorboards creaked beneath her feet, the same stage where the school board had heard her evidence, where truth had finally prevailed. Principal Thompson's handshake was warm and genuine as she presented Chanel's diploma. "Congratulations," she said into the microphone, then added more quietly, "Thank you for making us better." After returning to her seat, Chanel watched the remaining graduates cross the stage. Each step felt like victory, not just for her, but for everyone who'd been silenced before. When the ceremony concluded, the audience surged forward. But one figure reached her first, a tall woman in a tailored suit. "Miss Tyson," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Lauren Martinez from MIT's admissions office. I wanted to deliver this personally." She handed Chanel an envelope bearing the university seal. "Your full scholarship confirmation, as promised. We're honored to welcome you this fall." Chanel's fingers trembled as she opened the letter. The words blurred through happy tears. Full academic scholarship, housing stipend, research opportunities. "Thank you," she managed to say, but Dr. Martinez shook her head. "Thank you, Miss Tyson. Students like you, brave enough to challenge broken systems, that's who we want at MIT." As the admissions officer stepped away, Mr. Rhodes appeared at Chanel's elbow. His eyes were misty behind his glasses. "Knew you had it in you, right from the start," he said softly. "Watching you stand up to them made an old man proud." "I couldn't have done it without you," Chanel replied. "Without the evidence you helped me find." "You would have found another way," he interrupted gently. "That's who you are. I just handed you a key. You kicked down the whole door." More people pressed forward, classmates, parents, reporters. But Wanda cut through the crowd like a ship through water, wrapping her arms around her daughter. Her whisper carried years of struggle and hope. "You didn't just survive. You changed things." Chanel buried her face in her mother's shoulder, breathing in her familiar hospital soap scent mixed with her special occasion perfume. All the late nights, the documented incidents, the fear and doubt, it had led to this moment. Darnell joined their circle, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Look at you, changing the world," he said, voice rough with emotion, "making it harder for them to ignore us." Through the crowd, Chanel caught glimpses of other faces, younger students watching her with hope, teachers nodding with newfound respect, parents whose children would have a fairer chance because she'd refused to stay silent. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, turning the air golden. Cameras continued to flash as reporters called questions, but Chanel felt light, unburdened. The scholarship letter crinkled in her hand. Not just a ticket to college, but proof that standing up for truth could open doors instead of closing them. When they finally moved toward the exit, Chanel paused in the doorway. One last time, she looked back at the auditorium where so much had changed. Then she stepped into the bright sunlight, cameras clicking rapidly, capturing her image. But she kept walking forward, head high, unafraid. The future stretched before her, wide open and free. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.